Thank you so much, Tracy. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, my parents got us a dog that we named Snoopy, and we had Snoopy for a long time. He lived to be a little over 17 years, and so the majority of my life, by the time I'm 20 years old, we've had this dog Snoopy. And of course, those of you who've ever lost an animal that you loved, you know how that really it hits you hard. And so it was a consequential loss to our family. And at this point, though my grandmother that I called Charles, she was living with us. She was devastated over Snoopy's death. And for a period of years, though, my parents went without a pet at all. And finally, they began to talk about the prospect of getting another dog. My grandmother protested. She had lost this one dog, Snoopy, and she didn't want to, nor was anxious to ever have to say goodbye to another animal, and so she didn't like the idea. Finally, my parents, though, decided in spite of her protest, they wanted to get another dog, and so they got this Springer Spaniel that they named Henry. And when they got Henry, my grandmother said, "I'm not going to get too familiar with him." Well, that was a crock because she came to love that dog as much as my mom and dad did. And loving this dog was essentially an understatement. Some of you are like my parents were with Henry. You are with your dog or your cat or fish or whatever it is that you're excited about. Anyway, Henry was not treated like an animal. He was treated like another child. Actually, the favorite child is what it seems that he was treated like. Henry would go to work with my dad. And in the mornings around 10 o'clock, it would be time for Henry's snack. Henry's snack in the morning was cheese toast. So Henry would eat cheese toast at 10. Once it gets to be noonish or so, it's about time for lunch. And so my dad would get his lunch out and he would share his lunch with Henry. I believe Henry ate more people food than any of us have. In fact, let me give you an example. You've probably seen kids out on corners of neighborhoods raising money for their particular scout troop or their particular school or organization. And they'll be selling, like on a Saturday morning, a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, selling those boxes. You've probably seen those over the years. Henry had eaten so many Krispy Kreme donuts that he could recognize the box. This is no lie. If Henry was in the car with you and he saw somebody holding up a box, he would lunge at the window. He knew what the Krispy Kreme box looked like. Henry lived like a prince. My grandmother, who said, "I'm not going to get too familiar with him," well, I didn't even know that such a thing as this existed, but she would go and buy him doggy ice cream from the store. Let me also say, Henry was fat. But Henry, he lived a good life. He had a great gig. He would go to work with my dad. He would have the snack. He would share the lunch. He'd have the ice cream from my grandmother. He'd have plenty of time to play, running around outside. He had a whole tub full of toys that he could chew on or play with. They would get him groomed, and they'd have him have his hair cut. And Henry had a wonderful, wonderful life. Henry had a good gig. But you know what? I don't think Henry knew how good he had it. I don't think Henry knew how good he had it. Perhaps it is true for you this morning that right now you feel like, in terms of the circumstances that you're faced with, things kind of stink. It may be that you are experiencing for yourself health problems that are frightening to you. Or maybe it is perhaps even worse that you've got a loved one that's really dear to you that is perhaps facing a terminal condition. Maybe it is that your finances are a wreck and you can hardly sleep at night wondering how you're going to make that next mortgage payment. Maybe it is that your relationship, perhaps it is that your marriage is on the rocks and what you're experiencing is little more than fussing, arguing, and chronic dissension in your marital relationship. But maybe you're here this morning and you say, right now my circumstances kind of stink. In fact, kind of is an understatement. My circumstances right now are just lousy. I can hardly see the sun shining for all the clouds hanging over my head. What I want you to understand is this. If you have a relationship with God, if He is your shepherd, you may be like Henry, that you've got a good gig and you don't even know it. That as a child of God and one that is following the Lord, having a personal relationship with Him, if He is your shepherd, you've got an awfully good gig. But what exactly is it that you've got going for you? Look with me as we continue working our way through Psalm 23 today to Psalm 23, verse 5. Psalm 23, looking at verse 5. Psalm 23, verse 5, David says simply, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over." And just this one series of statements in this one singular verse, David is communicating as one that is in a personal relationship with God, with Him as His shepherd. Man, there's some great blessings that I have, that I experience, that I enjoy, that I possess. David recognized he had a good gig. God wants you to recognize as one of His sheep. You do as well, but what do you have going for you? Based on what David says, there's a few things, and the first is this. You have a shepherd who knows what lies ahead. You have a shepherd who knows what lies ahead. Now, we have been, and we're nearing the end of a series of messages through the 23rd Psalm that I've called Counting Blessings. The premise has been pretty simple, and that is that David is using this metaphor as one that is in a personal relationship with God. He's not merely God's child, but he likens it to being a sheep with the Lord as his shepherd. And as one of the Lord's sheep, as one that's in God's fold, there's a lot of blessings that are experienced, a lot of blessings that can be counted. And here in verse 5, he makes note of several. But odds are, if you have been in church for any length of time, you've grown very familiar with the 23rd Psalm. I don't know how many hundreds of times I have heard or read this psalm or used this in particular at a committal service at a cemetery, but we're very familiar with this, and you're aware that as the psalm begins, David is really using words clearly borrowed from the world of shepherding. The Lord is my shepherd. He talks about green pastures and still waters and rod and staff. We talked about that last week. These are words that are clearly borrowed and trying to generate the imagery or using the metaphor of a sheep with their shepherd. And you're aware that the psalm begins like that, and by the time that you get to verse 5, you feel like, well, he's changed now to something else. When he talks about a table being prepared in the presence of my enemies, that's talking about a feast, a banquet of some sort that God is preparing for us. The sheep metaphor is now gone. The truth is, for the vast majority of my life, I thought that was the case, that the metaphor changes, and he's talking about this banquet table or dining room table that God's preparing. But the truth is, David is actually keeping with this imagery, because the word that's used there, that's translated as table, literally means that which is spread out. That which is spread out. What David is talking about is something that we experience or can witness in the United States out in the Southwest, where you've got some mountainous areas. There are these elevated plots of land that are smooth or flat on top. We refer to them as mesas or tablelands. When David says of the Lord, He prepares for me a table, that's what he's talking about. Because at this point in history, and at this point and geographically, at this place in the world, David is in a very mountainous, or at least semi-mountainous area. And regularly a shepherd is going to look in these elevated regions for some smooth land for their sheep to be able to graze from, for them to not have to stand up on a hill like this and trying to eat. He's going to look for a tableland. And that's what it is that David is saying that God prepares for him. But as a shepherd would lead his sheep into a tableland, into one of these mesas, one of the things that he would do, first of all, is to inspect that land prior to leading the flock into it. He'd be looking for a number of things. He'd be looking for any type of predatory or dangerous animal. Obviously looking for things like wolves that would try to eat the sheep, or maybe poisonous vipers that may be in these grassy pastures that may strike one of his sheep on the nose and kill them. He'd be looking for plants or vegetation that might be poisonous to the sheep, or something that would make them sick. He'd be looking to see where exactly does this land end, and it begins to drop off to a cliff. What I'm saying is that prior to leading them into this, the shepherd would have inspected it. He would have known where all the dangers were. He would have known what challenges or threats might have existed. Taken together, David is saying, not simply in verse 2 that the Lord leads me to green pastures, but oftentimes He leads me to these green pastures on these tablelands. And before He leads me to these places where He wants me to go, He prepares it. He inspects it. He knows what I will encounter in that place. He knows what the dangers are, the pitfalls are, what threats may be looming. And so, in short, what he's saying is that the one that is guiding me, my shepherd, is leading me to places where He knows what lies ahead. Likewise, for you as a child of God, if you have a personal relationship with the Lord and can honestly say, as David did in verse 1, that the Lord is your shepherd, then what he speaks of in verse 5 is also true for you. And that you can and should take comfort in the fact that as God is leading you, the places that He is leading you to, He knows what's there. He knows what lies ahead. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily, just as it was true with the shepherd, that all the threats are removed, that all the snakes are killed or gotten rid of, that the cliff is somehow fenced up so that the sheep could not fall off of it. Rather, what it is it's saying, and David is communicating, is that the Lord leads me to places where nothing catches Him by surprise. He knows where He is leading us, all the challenges and threats that exist, and He is leading us with an awareness of what those are. When I finished college, I went straight into seminary, and just before classes began at Southeastern Seminary, they had this orientation like they had when I was in college, and you've probably experienced if you went to college or to grad school. And at this orientation, they'd be talking about the school, about policies and procedures and that type of thing. But one of the big things that you would do during this orientation time, however, is to sign up for and enlist or enroll in particular classes. At this point, I didn't know anybody at Southeastern, and I had no friends, no acquaintances there to speak of, and all I knew is that there were these slew of classes that I need to be able to, or I have to take to be able to graduate. And so I started looking, okay, Greek is offered at this time, and church history at this time, and philosophy of religion at this time. Let me see if I can pick some of these classes and come up with just a schedule that works for me time-wise. And so that's what I did. That first semester begins, and very quickly I come to two realizations. First of all, I have, as a Greek professor, the Antichrist. As a church history professor, I have the forerunner to the Antichrist. And they are ridiculously difficult. I mean, great professors, brilliant minds, but very, very difficult classes. As I'm in that first semester, I recognize I've got to make some friends here at Southeastern. And I need to, not simply for just friendship's sake and having people that you're sharing life with, but I needed to develop some relationships with people where I could talk to them, especially those that were upperclassmen, that I could say, hey, you've had this professor, what was that class like? Is he hard? Are his exams insatiably difficult? I mean, or how does that person compare to this person? And so I can find out what's the easier class and sign up for that, right? What I'm saying to you is that I had guidance from those who knew what lied ahead, who had been there, knew what the challenges were, and then I had it just going on my own. And you know what I discovered? It's a lot better being guided by those who know what is lying ahead. What I'm trying to say to you is that what was true for me in my own personal experience is true for you in your relationship with the Lord. The one who made heaven and earth knows everything that has gone on. He knows everything that is going on. He knows everything that will go on. There's nothing that catches Him by surprise. And as He is seeking to guide you and counsel you throughout the course of your life, He is leading you to places with a keen awareness and a full understanding of what lies ahead. Man, that ought to come as a colossal blessing and a great comfort that even though you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow or you don't know what's going to happen this afternoon, well, the one who made heaven and earth, He knows exactly what is going to happen, and it is that one that is guiding you. Listen, we've got a good gig. If you're a child of God, you're one of the Lord's sheep, you've got a good gig because you have a shepherd who knows what lies ahead. But David also communicates that you have a shepherd who meets your needs. That you have a shepherd who meets your needs. In verse 5, he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And so he's saying that you have prepared this land, this area where I'm going to be able to be led into, where there's going to be pasture land for grazing, and there's going to be streams of water to drink from. And he's saying as God is leading him, He is leading him in a way that he meets my needs. And David communicates that God meets his needs actually in three different ways. The first way goes without saying. If a shepherd is going to guide his sheep to a tableland, to one of these mazes, basis. He's going to lead them to these places because that place has sufficient area or sufficient grass for the sheep to graze from. There's enough room for them to walk around and stretch their legs, that there is sufficient water in the area. And so he's communicating that God is guiding me, ensuring that my needs, my physical needs are met. But what we talked about just a moment ago is that prior to leading his sheep into an area like this, a shepherd would first inspect it. He's going to be looking for any potential threats or any particular challenges, whether a predatory animal, a poisonous plant, or some venomous snake. And the shepherd would seek to discover where these were so that he could lead his sheep accordingly, because the sheep need safety. That's what David is talking about when he says, "You prepare this table before me," where? In the presence of my enemies. Listen, God knows the things that are a threat to you. He knows the people that are a threat to you. Not just physical threats, but far more than that, spiritual threats. He knows the individuals that you can be involved with or have a relationship with that are going to impugn your testimony, that are going to lead you further from God and not closer to Him. He knows what circumstances may pose a temptation for you to succumb and yield to sin and get trapped by and ensnared in it. He is seeking to lead you with this awareness, not driving out or removing all of these threats, but seeking to meet your needs and guide you in the very midst of them. But there's another way that He communicates that God meets our needs, and that's where He says, "You anoint my head with oil." Regularly, one of the things that a shepherd would do with his sheep is to inspect them. And so he'd have them all line up at attention. No, but anyway, but he was going to inspect the sheep. And so this wasn't just a passing glance. He would individually take them and he would look at their hooves. He would look at their legs. He would inspect their faces to see if there were any cuts or lacerations, any injuries that the animal had. And if he found any of those, what he would use is some type of oil. And there were all sorts of oils at this point in history that had medicinal qualities or medicinal purposes. And the shepherd would put some of that oil on these cuts or on these lacerations to promote and to bring about healing. When David says that the Lord does this for him, he's saying, when I experience healing, it's because God provides it for me. When my heart is aching, or when even my body is ill, when my spirit is broken, God brings healing. Now, don't misunderstand me, and do not stretch this promise to suggest that as a child of God or as one of God's sheep, that you'll never experience a chronic health problem, that you'll never experience a terminal condition, that you'll never experience significant heartache. I'm not suggesting that whatsoever. We'll talk more about in a moment how God can use those even to meet our needs. What David, though, is saying is, when the time comes that I experience healing, it's because the shepherd provides it for me. David is saying that God meets his needs. His physical needs, his needs for safety and security, his needs for physical, emotional, or spiritual healing. David says, the Lord provides all of that for me. What was true then for David is true for you if the Lord is your shepherd. You've got a shepherd who meets your needs, and that's a good gig. But relative to this whole issue of needs, the simple truth is that we have some problems. For one thing, we have difficulty distinguishing between that which we need and that which we want, don't we? We have great difficulty distinguishing between that which we need and that which we want. A good case in point is this. Here in American life, we have gotten to the point where we view cable TV as a need, don't we? We view having a cell phone as a need. We view the existence of internet technology and high-speed data on a cell phone. We've gotten to the point where we view that as a need. What happens is that we get so accustomed to and so reliant on having ready access to the things that we want that these things get elevated to the point of need. As a result, financially, we get to the point where we say, I need more income. There's got to be more money coming in because I've got all of these needs. When in truth, they're not all needs. We've just grown so accustomed to having our wants met that they've become needs for us. But there's another problem that we have with this whole concept of need, which is this. I believe that if the truth were told, most of us have difficulty or at least experience a measure of failure in understanding what the word need actually means. When we hear the word, we typically think of food and clothing and shelter and a job. Those are things that we need, and those things we tend to view as what? This is positive. Having a job is a positive thing. Having food on your table is a positive thing. Having a table to put your food on, that's a positive thing. All of these things are needs, and we view those needs as being positive things. Sometimes, however, what we need is not positive, or at least is not felt by us to be a positive thing. Here's what I want you to get. A need is something that is required by a person or a thing to accomplish its purpose. A need is what is absolutely required for a person or a thing to accomplish its purpose. For example, your car needs gasoline. Why? Because to accomplish its purpose of cranking and moving from place to place, it is a requirement. It is necessary for it to have gasoline. It needs it. Sometimes what we need as the children of God to accomplish our God-given purposes, we may not view as pleasant. Let me give you an example. Recently, Caroline and I were talking with a mother of a 4-year-old, and it's not anyone related to the church, but this mother of a 4-year-old that we have been around on repeated occasions. And this particular little boy is, well, he's a tyrant. I think he aspires to be the dictator of a small country somewhere in the future. And this is a child that we have witnessed repeatedly throw these temper tantrums and these colossal fits, and he will act out in just terrible, awful ways, and there are effectively no consequences brought to bear in his life. And so we knew this to be true of him, and we were talking with his mother, and she was describing this incident that happened recently in their preschool. Well, it turns out that this little boy had a little plastic bug, and somehow, at some point during class, he takes this little plastic bug and throws it and smacks the teacher in the face with it. Well, the teacher obviously did not like this, and I don't know how hard he threw it, and it was not by accident, it was intentional. He threw this intending to smack her in the face. And so after this, she corrects him and seeks to discipline him for this, but he begins to throw a fit, and he's saying all sorts of hateful and nasty things. And I don't know all the details, but this part I do know. That is, that the teacher took him to the daycare director's office. And at that point, they call this child's mother. The mother comes to pick up her son because the director said, he can't stay here today. In fact, you need to keep him out tomorrow. This 4-year-old gets kicked out of preschool. You are a bad dude when you get kicked out of preschool. Now, this is the part that I thought was interesting. As she is recounting this series of incidences to us, she said the first thing that she did after she got home was to call his doctor, to call the little boy's doctor. And after doing so and speaking with the doctor, she felt so much better because at that point the doctor said, well, it was just a few days ago that he finished this dose pack of prednisone. And prednisone may cause you to be a bit more wired. Oh, she felt so much better at that point. Oh, it's not that this child has a problem. Oh, it was just the prednisone. Do you know what that child really needs? That child needs some discipline. He needs stern and loving correction. He needs consistent discipline. He needs a spanking. But neither this child nor his mother is capable of recognizing the need because that's unpleasant. That's unpleasant. Discipline, however, is a need for that child or any child to achieve and experience their God-given potential. A need is that which you or any other person or thing needs and is necessary for them to accomplish their purpose. I want you to understand that the God who made heaven and earth, the God who made you, He knows exactly what you need to accomplish the purposes that He has set forth before you. He knows that you need food and shelter and clothing, and He knows that you need love. He knows that you need encouragement. He knows that you need those things. But He also sometimes knows that there's some things that you view as unpleasant that you also need. Sometimes you need to go through some dark waters. Sometimes you need to go through some painful circumstances. Sometimes you need to not just hear about loss, you need to personally experience it. And you need to experience these things so that you can come to become the man, become the woman that God can work through to accomplish His purposes. David says of the Lord, he says of His shepherd, He meets my needs. He meets the basic stuff like food and shelter. He meets the emotional needs like love and support and encouragement. He meets the needs that I have for guidance and safety and protection. But He meets the needs that I have to grow, to be honed, to be shapened. About the fulfillment of our needs, Paul put it this way in Philippians chapter 4. My God shall supply all your needs according to His riches and glory through Christ Jesus. Too many times we have taken that verse and we insert needs as, okay, that's the money that I need, that's the job that I need, that's the love that I need, that's the relationship that I need. But God meets even more than that. It's not just the things that you may view as pleasant. It also involves those things that you may view as unpleasant. Why? Because your shepherd knows even better than you exactly what you need. Listen, you've got a good gig. David recognized that he had a good gig. It's one that's a follower of God, that's in a relationship with the Lord. I have a shepherd who knows what lies ahead. I have a shepherd who meets my needs. But then he communicates a final blessing, and that is this. I have a shepherd who meets more than my needs. I have a shepherd who meets more than my needs. At the end of verse 5, David says, my cup runs over. Several weeks ago, we were talking about how, among other things, it's true of sheep that they are very skittish animals. They are so because they're essentially defenseless. They don't have horns. They don't have sharp teeth. They don't have exceptional speed and agility. They've got good hearing and excellent peripheral vision. That's about all that they've got. As a result, anything that is very loud, they're going to run from. Anything that there's a lot of movement, they're going to run away from. And one of the things that we talked about is that a shepherd can lead his sheep to the water that they need, but if that water is from a rushing river, the sound of that, the sight of that is going to scare them away. So what he's going to be looking for is what he describes back in verse 2, still waters. But still waters were not always readily available. Sometimes in that mesa, in that table land, there's water, but it's rushing too quickly, and the sheep are frightened of it. So what the shepherd would do is to keep with him this large two-handled cup. And what he would then do is he would go down to that rushing river, and he would scoop up water into that cup, and then take the still water over to the sheep, where they could get what they need in the fashion that they can receive it. And of that cup, what does David say? It runs over. Sheep need water. Sheep have these needs. And not only are the needs met, they're met in excess of the need. David said, this cup that He provides for me, it runs over. Jeremiah says in Lamentations 3, that it is through the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. They're new every morning. Every day God brings new blessings and new provision into your life. With each passing day there's new blessings and new provision that He provides for you. In Psalm 68:19 the psalmist says, blessed be the Lord who daily loads us with benefits. We talked earlier this morning about 2 Peter chapter 2 where he says of God that through His divine power He gives us everything necessary for life and godliness. What David is saying is that it's not simply that God meets my needs, but He gives me even more than I need. You know, it feels good knowing that you've got what you need. It feels even better knowing that you've got even more than you need. I may be a little strange I may be a little strange, period. But anyway, one of the things, it's been true of me since I was even a little boy. I like suits. I liked, even as a little boy, wearing a suit. And like especially when I was single, I used to love and go suit shopping. And sincerely, I'd buy 3 or 4 suits a year as a single man. And marriage and 4 kids has essentially brought all that to a screeching halt. But I used to love doing that. And there was a particular store that I would go to, and a particular guy that his name was Jackson, that would wait on me, and he knew me by name, obviously knew him by name. And so let's say I'm going to that store and I'm looking for a new suit. I'm going to be browsing and seeing if there's anything that catches my attention, a particular color or a different color or a particular pattern that catches my attention. I'm going to see that, and if it catches my interest, I'm going to take that hanger off the rack. And what I'm going to do then is to take that jacket off, and I'm going to put it on. Then I'm going to go over to the mirror, and not to see if I look good, but to see how good I look. Right? It's very different. Anyway, so I go over to the mirror, and I've got this jacket on. And if it looks decent, and at this point I'm ready or prepared to buy a suit on this particular day, at that point I'm going to say, okay, let's go ahead and go with this. And at that point I'll get the slacks, and I will go back into the dressing room. I'll put this on, and I'll come back out to Jackson, and he's going to measure this suit for alterations. Consistently, there were going to be some basic alterations I would need. Almost exclusively, I'd have to have the sleeves brought up just a little bit. And obviously, the pant leg was unfinished, and so they'd need to be either cuffed or hemmed. But typically, as I was looking for a suit, and as I'm trying this on, I don't want it to fit. I want it to more than fit. What I wanted was a suit that would need to be brought in the waist. I wanted a suit jacket that would need to be brought in a little bit in the back. Why? Because accidentally, purely by accident, I may gain a little bit. I may eat a little too much and get a little bit bigger just by accident. And at that point, I don't want to have to replace the suit. I just want to have enough fabric to let it out a little bit. See, I wasn't looking for just having, and it wasn't just sufficient to have what I needed. What was really good was having a little bit more than I needed. That's the picture that David is trying to paint here of God. I've got a good gig because the one who knows me even better than I know myself, he knows what my needs are. Not only does he meet them, he meets them in excess of the need. David was saying, the Lord is my shepherd, and I've got a good gig. He knows for me what lies ahead. He meets my needs. He meets more than my need. So the question for you this morning is this: what does this have to do with you? Where does this intersect your life? Well, first of all, it leads you back to what David says in verse 1, where he says, the Lord is my shepherd. All the blessings that he has described, not simply in this verse, but in every verse leading up to it, is contingent on that single statement. And whether you can say that I have a personal relationship with the God of the universe, and he is not simply my heavenly Father, but he's my shepherd. Can you say that? Can you say it honestly and it be true? If not, the Lord wants you to be one of his sheep. He wants to bring you into the fold. Just a few moments, we're going to have a time when you can respond. You can find out what it would take, and we can begin a conversation so that you can come to know the God of the universe as your personal Lord and Savior and as the shepherd of your life. But maybe you're here this morning and you say, well, Michael, I've already done that. I'm part of the fold. I'm one of his sheep. These blessings that he's talked about, well, those are true for me. But maybe it is this morning that you'd say, I've had an awfully difficult time recognizing just how he meets my needs because I've just been thinking about the stuff that I wanted. I didn't really understand fully when God meets my needs what that involves, and that sometimes, oftentimes, it involves that which I would say feels unpleasant. Maybe God is meeting the needs that you have through some unpleasant circumstances, and finally, it's clicked in your mind, this is what God is up to. Perhaps it is that you just need to talk to him about it and say, Lord, I'm beginning to learn. Continue to open my eyes. Maybe there's another decision that God is leading you to make today, but understand this. When you're one of the Lord's sheep, even when you're not thinking about it, even when it doesn't register with you, man, you've got a good gig. The question is today, though, what are you going to do about it? Won't you bow your heads with me?